And now for more on President Yi's Europe trip, we're joined today by Dr. David Jenkins, Associate Professor at the Department of Political Science at Gyeongsang National University. Professor Jenkins, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
So President Yi met with the Italian president last night. What stood out to you the most from the summit?
Yeah, so there's strong economic ties between Europe, between Italy and Korea. So that's kind of like that was to be expected. It was to be expected that they would talk about that. What sort of surprised me was the mentioning of defense, right? Because Italy is itself is a has a strong defense industry, and as does France, right? Korea's main partners in terms of defense exports are going to be, Poland, Romania, the Eastern European countries threatened by Russia. So that was really interesting to see them mention expanded and systematic defense cooperation, coordination. Suggests that there is a kind of a strategic pivot happening as Korea becomes a more important player in the global balance of power, right, in the global world order. The mentioning of North Korea also was pretty interesting to me specifically, and they mentioned peaceful coexistence. Which is kind of it doesn't seem like much, but that is kind of important given the history of South Korea's policy towards North Korea. So those are the big things that stuck out to me. Yeah.
Right, a lot of things, a lot discussed in Italy. And President Yi is also scheduled to visit the Vatican and France. Where do you see the biggest opportunities for Korea and Europe to strengthen trade and economic cooperation?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest areas is going to be probably aerospace and missile technology, right? France, Europe is strong in the manufacturing equipment that is used to make semiconductors. Of course, South Korea uses those machines to create semiconductors, make semiconductors. So there's a high complementarity there. And I think going forward, as drones and things like that require high technology it's going to be important to have cooperation on those issues as that becomes a bigger element of military strategy. And I think also, in terms of nuclear energy, right? Korea has nuclear energy, strong nuclear energy. Europe also has complementarities there. So I think going forward, as traditionally Europe was sort of not considering nuclear energy as a part of a shift towards sustainable energy, but recent events have sort of expanded its thinking, and it's more looking at nuclear energy as a kind of a middle step, right? A path towards a part of its path towards sustainability. And so I think they're going to see lots of opportunities for cooperation there, perhaps joint collaboration in a third country, right? A project between Korea and Europe, and in terms of making it and developing nuclear technology in a third country. And also, I think generally just to reduce the reliance from Europe's perspective, to reduce reliance on China, right, for high technology as well. I think that's going to be something important going forward, right?
Right, and on diplomatic and security cooperation, why is Europe such an important partner for South Korea in these areas?
Yeah, so I think the bigger picture here, right, is the changing world order as the United States under Trump has vastly shifted its approach to the world order. It's much more based on self-interest and power politics and these kinds of things. And so I think that from Europe's perspective, right, and both Korea, Korea and Europe have a shared interest in maintaining the rules-based world order and preventing a slide into just the politics of power, right, and self-interest that dominated almost all of human history, right? And so they have a shared interest in that. France in particular, because France is important to Korea because it's on the UN Security Council, right? It has a veto on the Security Council, and it's also a nuclear power, right? And so I think as a nuclear power, especially in terms of energy, right, nuclear energy, it's going to be important for Korea to cooperate closely with France going forward as it continues to develop nuclear power. Yeah.
Right, and the G7 summit in France will be one of the highlights of this trip. What are President Lee Jae-myung's key goals for the G7 meeting?
Yeah, so his stated goals, based on official documents that they've released, are expanding trade, especially among small and medium businesses. That's some of the official goals. Also, expanding supply chain resilience, right? Increasing supply chain resilience, and so that it's supply chains are not so sensitive to shocks like the oil shock we see now coming from the war in Iran or Corona or other kinds of shocks, strategic, moves from China to block supplies of certain products. So I think it's going to be a lot of discussion about that. I think there's going to be discussion also about, the strategic problem of, cooperation between Russia and North Korea and things like this, right? Or China, right? And that is going to be an issue because that involves obviously both Europe and Asia, right? Even though it's somewhat geographically far, that's going to be a problem for Europe going forward, in terms of like determining how to confront the challenge of cooperation between autocratic and authoritarian powers. Who would like to continue? Who support a slide into the politics of power and these kinds of things.
Right, we'll have to see how that goes. All right, Professor Jenkins, thank you so much for your time and insight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.